At Remagen, Germany, interviews with men who seized the first bridge over the Rhine intact. Remagen was taken early in March by a task force of the 9th Armored Division. Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Engemann, commander of the task force, describes his first view of the undamaged Remagen Bridge.
On March the 7th, at about noon, with Lieutenant Grimble as my advance guard commander, my column came to the hill there, which commands a view of this whole valley. I formulated a plan to come into the town and reach the approach to the bridge. Movement began. When the head of the column got to the end of the bridge on the other side, the tanks immediately took position and began firing across the bridge to the approaches on this side at the Germans who were on the bridge.
On the 14th of March 1945, months before the end of the Second World War, a German major was dragged out to face his executioner. His execution had been ordered specifically by Adolf Hitler for losing a pivotal and strategic position to the Allies. The Battle of Remagen was a fight for a bridgehead, the Ludendorff Bridge, and the Germans tried everything they could, including even throwing V-2 rockets at the bridge. Over 300 German Luftwaffe planes attacked it after the Americans seized control of it. Before the Allies, it was significant, as they had captured a bridge across the Rhine. The Allies were able to transport 5 divisions across the Rhine into the Ruhr region. Major Johannes Scheller was the major who lost the bridge, and he incurred the wrath of the Führer, and after being sentenced to death by court-martial, Major Scheller was dragged out to face his sole executioner, armed with his pistol. But what happened with his execution, and what happened following the loss of the bridge? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Major Johannes Scheller was born in 1913 in Cologne, and he is best remembered for being the last commander of the Ludendorff Bridge in Remagen. He was a military man, and over the course of a number of years, he rose throughout the ranks of the Wehrmacht to become a major. But in the final stages of the Second World War in Europe, after pushing the Germans back during the Battle of the Bulge, the Allied forces pushed into Western Germany. Supreme Allied Commander General Eisenhower claimed that there were 2 steps to the mission. The first was to stop German forces defending the west bank of the Rhine River from escaping to the east bank, and the second step was to allow the Allies to find a river crossing where they could concentrate an attack and leave lesser forces defending the remainder of the front. The Allies did not believe that they would capture a bridge intact, and they instead brought large amounts of bridging equipment to the front. On the 1st of March 1945, there were only 4 bridges across the Rhine standing. The Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen was selected to concentrate an attack upon. Hitler issued orders that the line would be held at all costs, and he ordered no retreat or step backwards. He did not want the Allies crossing the Rhine, and it would have made sense for the Germans to fall back to the east side of the Rhine and to then regroup. But Hitler refused to allow this. Units were threatened with being overrun and surrounded, and to protect themselves from Hitler's wrath, some German commanders falsified reports about the actual state of the fighting around the river. On the 7th of March 1945, Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Engemann led a task force named after him towards Remagen, a small village of roughly 5,000. They found that the Ludendorff Bridge was intact, and it was one of 3 bridges across the Rhine which had not yet been blown up. German vehicles were spotted retreating and heading over the bridge, and then a battle for the bridge erupted. Dispatched to take command at Remagen and the bridge was Major Johannes Scheller, and he had been moved from another region to do this. Scheller arrived at the bridge 2 hours before the Americans, and he had not brought with him the reinforcements that he needed. Engemann was ordered to capture the bridge as quickly as possible by the Allied authorities, and there was no intelligence as to the size of the German forces on the opposite bank, and there was some suspicion that the bridge could be a trap, luring Allied soldiers to their deaths. Tanks and troops were ordered towards the bridge, and the Germans relied on local Volkssturm defenders, civilians to fight against the Allies, and they were conscripted into the battle. There were no anti-tank ditches, mines, barbed wire or trenches on the route to Remagen. The only defence that slowed the Americans down was a machine gun close to the tower square, but 2 Pershing tanks dealt with this. At around 3 p.m. in the afternoon, American soldiers found out that the bridge was to be destroyed in the following hour, and artillery was opened up on the other side of the bank to try and stop this happening. Major Scheller saw how poorly the bridge was defended, and he attempted to get passing German troops to help, but one driver in a vehicle carrying 5 men and a machine gun team quickly drove away from the bridge, wanting nothing to do with it. Scheller realised that the bridge could not be defended, and he was ready to destroy it when a lieutenant named Karl Peters asked for more time to get his forces back across the bridge. Scheller delayed destroying the bridge because Peters was in charge of a top-secret new rocket launcher system, and Scheller knew that artillery in the armed forces was in short supply. Only half the amount of military explosives had been planted on the bridge, as there was a shortage, and Scheller and an adjutant entered a railroad tunnel where the detonators had been placed. The charges were blown, but it did not destroy the bridge properly. The Americans then were able to cross the bridge, and it was said that, "We ran down the middle of the bridge, shouting as we went. I didn't stop because I knew that if I kept moving, they couldn't hit me. My men were in a squad column, and not one of them was hit. We took cover in some bomb craters. Then we just sat and waited for others to come. That's the way it was." There was little to no resistance for the Americans crossing the bridge, and Scheller escaped out of the far end of the tunnel. The US forces then established their own bridgehead, and they also gained the eastern shore after crossing it, but over the course of the next week, it became the target of German armed forces. The Luftwaffe heavily bombed the bridge in an attempt to destroy it, and there were scores of German planes shot down by US fighters and also anti-aircraft batteries. Even V-2 rockets were ordered to be fired upon the position. Major Johannes Scheller, after retreating and losing the bridge, tried to reach his superiors on bicycle to inform what was happening, and his command were not aware that the Ludendorff Bridge had been captured. A German Major General later claimed about the bridgehead that the Remagen affair caused a great stir in the German Supreme Command. Remagen should have been considered a basis for termination of the war. Remagen created a dangerous and unpleasant abscess within the last German defences, and it provided an ideal springboard for the coming offensive east of the Rhine. The Remagen bridgehead made the other crossing of the Rhine a much easier task for the enemy. Furthermore, it tired German forces, which should have been resting to withstand the next major assault. Hitler was furious with the loss of the bridge, and he ordered a loyal and fanatical general from the Eastern Front to be in charge of a flying court. This would be involved in the court-martial and execution of those who had failed to destroy the bridge and who had been pivotal to the loss of it. Rudolf Hubener was Hitler's hitman who acted in this command, and he travelled to Army Group B headquarters with 2 military police officers who would act as the executioners. Major Scheller was captured by German forces, and he was brought in front of a Nazi court-martial. Hubener worked as the prosecutor and judge, and Scheller and also Peters were tried. Scheller had arrived at the front 2 hours before the Americans attacked the bridge, so had hardly any time to try and muster forces, and he also told the court that he had tried to rally some Germans but they drove off. Rudolf Hubener was not interested in this, and he then convicted Scheller for failing to carry out his orders and dereliction of his duty, as he had not blown the bridge up. Peters was also convicted, as he had allowed his secret anti-aircraft weapon to fall into the hands of the Americans. Scheller was the following day dragged out of a small cell where he was being held in Rimbach. The 2 police officers who accompanied Hubener were the executioners, and upon the orders of Hubener, Major Scheller was ordered to kneel down on the floor. He was not shot by a firing squad, but executed by a sole executioner. The German police officer went up behind the kneeling Scheller, and he pulled out his pistol and instantly fired a shot into the neck of Scheller, and he fell forward and was immediately executed. He was then buried in a very shallow grave. Field Marshal Kesselring later sent out a dispatch documenting the executions for those who had failed to hold the Ludendorff Bridge, and in this he claimed, "An important bridge across the Rhine has fallen into enemy hands without being damaged, despite the fact that all preparations for its demolition had been made. This has happened because the responsible leaders had abandoned the bridgehead. They have acted in an irresponsible and cowardly way. The 5 guilty officers were condemned to death by court-martial, one of them a captain in absentia. The sentence was executed against 3 majors and 1 lieutenant. The above information is to be communicated to all troops as rapidly as possible and should be considered a warning to everyone. Who does not live in honour will die in shame." In the aftermath of Scheller and the other executions, some German officers ensured that they had a large amount of explosives nearby just in case they had to blow up some infrastructure, and some bridges were even blown up in the rear areas by senior officers, and this caused even more problems for the German forces. However, later the Ludendorff Bridge would fall into the river. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.